Yes. Can you hear me? Can can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. So I have two general comments, somewhat related to some of the issues tonight, but it's a general comment. I would encourage the city council to be careful about creating new fees in the community, since some of the issues tonight involve new fees. And as background, I'll give you an example. Have to put a new roof on my house this year. Our estimate is about $13,000. I'm one of the houses which is in a development which has an expired stormwater fee. The last time we met with the South Burlington stormwater people, it was estimated to be $6,000 per household. My city tax bill, and my house is assessed at 13% less than the average, will be $7,500. It's this year, it's going to go up. There's a lot of built-in costs that people in this community are dealing with, and it's only going to get worse with going forward. So I would encourage you to be very careful about creating new fees on just about anything, such as any type of changes to a house. People are stressed out. There's a lot of wealthy people in the community, but not everybody is wealthy. So I would encourage you to be careful about doing those new fees. The second point I just wanted to say was, I know this community is very interested in reducing its carbon footprint as much as possible, but I think you have to be aware of the fact that we're part of a global community. And much of the carbon dioxide which is being released into the atmosphere is not coming from the state of Vermont. For instance, China produces 1,500 times more greenhouse gases than the state of Vermont. Most of our electric batteries, most of our solar panels, most of our um, heat pumps are coming from China, and they use a lot of coal-fired electricity to produce those things. So our carbon footprint compared to the rest of the world is very small, and I would encourage you to be very, very careful about assessing new fees and new requirements to lower your carbon footprint when much of our consumption is involving products which are made from coal-fired power plants. Thank you for listening to my comments.
Ooh, and if this is
Hardwired
adopted, then they could use wireless interconnected.
Once the state
Oh.
passes the code.
Okay.
It was included in the language in the ordinance update.
Okay.
So we might want to clarify that one.
Okay. So it's a little bit more.
Yeah, because we can do it in a single family home because we have the state's giving us that
Correct.
Get that jurisdiction.
Yep.
Sorry.
Wireless
yes.
is a little bit more expensive on the units, but it's a little bit disruptive. You don't have to drill so many holes everywhere, and so okay. Which if it's brand new construction, that's not a big deal, right? But if it's then afterwards, okay. What about if somebody puts an in-ground pool at their house, and they have a natural gas pool heater that's located outside? Is that under your jurisdiction anyway, or is that electrical?
So the electrical aspect of it would be in our jurisdiction. The gas piping would be plumbing.
Yep.
So we do not have that jurisdiction, so that's the state plumbing inspector,
Okay, but
who the fire marshal's office works with on a daily basis.
Right.
So there's a relationship there, but they would have to deal with that gas piping through the state permitting process.
is there code for location for a pool heating a natural gas fired boiler?
Single family home is probably not, because the state has no single family jurisdiction anywhere.
Period.
For anything.
Oh.
Yeah, so if you're talking about a single family home pool heater,
Yeah.
the state wouldn't be involved either.
We had an incident like
We did.
Oh yeah. So I just want to clarify that if there's something we can do to ensure that they're located where they should be located, but there's no code for it.
Yeah, that would require an entire plumbing inspector division of the fire marshal's office.
Ooh, ouch. Or the state to take action and
But they don't enforce single family.
they don't.
So
Okay.
yeah.
All right. So we're back to the beginning. Okay. All right.
Steve,
Uh,
Tim, if you're all done, I had some questions.
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Just wanted to clarify something. You mentioned at some point you couldn't project the revenues generated, and the phraseology you use sort of says that was like the goal is what were the revenues generated. I just want to be clear for the record that what's motivating this action is about safety and enhancing the safety of the community.
Oh, I'm sorry if I said it like that was the goal. No. I know that's usually a question.
Sure,
It's
no,
a curiosity or
But
question.
just for the public, I wanted
And,
to be
yeah.
sure that what is motivating this. Thank you. You mentioned that we're one of, I think you said, 10 municipalities that have this purview or this flexibility to enter into sort of single-family homes into their jurisdiction. Are you aware of any of the other municipalities doing of a similar nature, or would we sort of be a pilot in the state for this?
To my knowledge, Burlington is the only other community that enforces the code on single family home.
Doesn't Colchester?
I don't think so, because Colchester does not have a local agreement.
Okay.
And I guess my last question, it was curious because when you talked about homes that would require sprinklers if they didn't, have that public way, off the top of your head, any guess how many homes like that would be in South Burlington? It seems sort of rare that there's such a limited access where homes are.
And it's not super common.
A dozen.
Yeah, I would say maybe a dozen. I mean, I can think of like some southern ends of, Heinsberg Road, Dorset Street, where you start getting out there where you got longer driveways.
So the vast majority of the
Yeah.
homes would be exempt from something like this.
Yeah, we pull this out of the chapter in the code that it's called fire department access, right? And it's all about how close can the fire department get to fight potential fire. So.
I've always been grateful I have a fire hydrant right in the corner of my home. So
Yeah, most developers and contractors are going to want, people buying those houses are going to want the road plowed and that sort of thing. So they're usually building that as a public way, which prevents that issue.
okay, thank you.
So that begs the question: what's the definition of a public way, and is that something that the city has taken over the jurisdiction of that as a public street, or?
I mean,
You said something about having a hammerhead at the end for the fire truck to be able to turn around.
Yeah, so essentially it's anywhere we can drive the fire truck and be able to easily get in and get back out, right? So if you lack the cul-de-sac, if you lack the hammerhead, if the road wasn't built to a certain standard, like everything around here is built to carry the load of our trucks coming in. So,
So if it's a private road that serves 5 houses, right, that's like 600 feet long, but it has a hammerhead at the end, it would still qualify as a public way. And then they wouldn't need sprinkling on the single-family homes. Okay.
I think a good way to look at it, if the road is not built to allow fire truck access,
Right.
sprinklers are then an equivalency
Yeah.
to allow for protection
Okay.
for the delay in arrival of fire truck.
Got it. Got it. Okay. I'm good.
I have one more. Too.
Good.
Questions?
Go ahead.
I'm just curious about the change to the time of sale inspection section. So I guess it used to be, as I'm reading it, upon request, and now we're going to mandate an inspection for each sale. And just what's the thinking there? Am I reading that right?
yeah, I mean, it's essentially always been mandated. You're supposed to have done it. The language said request, more so that either the person selling it, the person buying it, or the realtor could request it. We're simply clarifying that to say this needs to be done. This has to be done.
So it's somewhere it said that already, that
Yep.
one of those people had to do it.
Yep.
Okay. And it doesn't apply for single family homes still? So there's just a time of sale inspection for public buildings? Is that?
Have we considered that?
Well, there, Andrew, that's one thing we actually had not thought about is adding single family homes in. We've had no discussion on that. Certainly that would be in your purview, and it'd be easy enough to say that by adopting it. But at this point, we had no conversation about adding single family homes into to have an inspection on sale.
I mean, I could see that being a lot.
I would.
Because if
I mean,
those-
I guess I would encourage you to. I don't think it's an issue.
I mean,
by and large.
I'm just talking out loud, but I can see having those homes never kind of been subject to regime. Potentially, there could be a lot of expense for the homeowner built into that. So,
Well, so like when I sold my home in 2012, the realtor said, there are requirements for, CO and smoke detectors, but on the old homes, there's no requirement for them to be hardwired interconnected, I don't think, right, for existing. Or it's not even in the state code.
If you adopt the code,
Right.
then there would be requirements set forth on if you went down this path where you adopted the ordinance and then set forth this inspection would be required,
At sale.
then it would
Then it would be required.
would be required.
Right.
Otherwise, I think the realtor signs on a single family home. The realtor signs off on, or the owner signs off that they've been notified about what type of devices are in the house.
Yeah, but that's not in this this document yet. Okay, I think we should have that discussion in the future as well, but not tonight. All right, Elizabeth, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's all right. Thank you for answering a lot of questions that I sent in. I still am struggling with this. I think my understanding is the state does not cover single family homes, so we would be one of 2 municipalities that would be adding that. On the inspection side, my understanding is that many contracts are signed that forego inspection, and particularly in a competitive selling environment. I've heard that done more recently. I don't know if that's true or not, but I have heard that happening just because that was sort of another hurdle along with qualifying for financing or something like that that might make one buyer or seller more motivated. The 5,000 still seems like in today's environment, that seems like a very low bar to trigger the ordinance, given labor and materials in this environment. And one of the things we have talked about several times is that we're going to be data driven in our ordinance revisions. And I heard the anecdotal comment that one of the drivers here, there's several fires in single family homes that would have been caught through inspection. And I've seen no data on that. So that would be very helpful to me to see that information with some diagnostics of what the root cause was. And
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to 2 events in one new home that was built in the city. They had electrical malfunction issues early on in occupying the building, and which would have been caught during an electrical inspection. And then a couple months later, they had a fire in their home due to insulation being placed too closely to heating elements and a chimney. And that would have been caught during an inspection before the walls were sheetrocked. and would have saved a significant amount of money on that house. If we had known last year, we had a fire in a home, single family home where there were renovations that were not to code that involved heating elements, and that caused another fire with significant damage to that home. That again would have hit the threshold for renovation and would have had to meet the code through inspection and code enforcement, and that fire wouldn't have occurred, most likely wouldn't have occurred during that as well. So those are, in the last 12 months, those are just 3 examples.
But there are, the first example you gave, there are construction fees required by the state, correct? That are substantial. And maybe this is the wrong, but there are inspections required on new construction.
Not on a single family home, there is
At
not.
all.
No.
Can I, along those lines, if I can clarify that on the 5,000, just so, because I think it's a question the population will ask. You know, the examples you gave are sort of tied to electric or heat based. But when you say renovation of 5,000, it doesn't necessarily presuppose renovation that touches on a heat element or an electric element as a spark.
No, we use that dollar amount specifically because that was what the trigger is for planning and zoning for their permit. We understand it change in footprint or $5,000 or more in work. That is certainly a policy decision that you all can alter that number.
Is there any sense, given all the examples you referenced were somehow related to a heat source or an electric source, was there any sense in saying renovations that involve heat elements or electric elements, which would, I mean, if the goal is safety, unless there are other safety concerns that I'm not aware of, if you do other sort of renovations?
So I guess you have to break those into 2 categories, right? The heating situation, depending on what it is, could involve fire and life safety. In that particular case, it would have. Actually, in both cases that I use as an example, it would have. One was new construction. One was a renovation that would have been a costly renovation that we would have caught it on. The electrical is separate, right? Separate ordinance, separate code group. But that certainly would have been caught as well during inspections of that work.
But the trigger, now, so if I heard you correctly, there's already a trigger for any kind of electric work. It needs to be with code.
We'll talk about that next.
Because it seems, again, it comes back to this heating, electric, and I can imagine doing some renovations that do not touch on heating elements or electric elements.
They may also, however, touch on egress. Mm-hmm. They may touch on structural elements that may or may not be supported by the current structure that's standing. So those are some of the other primary things that we'll always be looking at.
I think as we go forward, I mean, obviously people are not going to, some people, and a lot of people, even if you pay for it, you're sort of always reluctantly paying for it. Even if you acknowledge it, it's for your own good and your own safety. But I think the more we can elucidate the why, instead of just saying it's an arbitrary figure of 5,000, or zoning does it, so let's do it as well. I think it will help, the public acceptance that, this is all in our collective safety.
I think it does bring consistency. If you need a zoning permit, then you're also then just being funneled to the fire department. And now with online permitting, there's a series of questions that would just sends that permit applicant to both places. I think that's the value of being consistent.
And
This is the trigger.
Right, this is the trigger, but also just explaining the trigger. It's not just because it's public zoning at 5,000. There are things that if you do within that 5,000 scope that could, as you mentioned now, 4 different things. I'd always thought about heating and electric. You gave 2 other examples. I always want to understand, okay, I got it. I understand why I'm paying for this. It is in my family's interest or my personal interest or my building's interest. Thank you.
You don't know what you're going to find until you inspect it. And you'll be surprised what you find sometimes, right? It happens like that. So that's why we're doing this.
But also just to clarify for the public, right? The narrow thing that we're talking about here is just single family homes. But for duplexes and all other homes, this trigger is 0. Right? There's always a fire inspection. So we're saying we're giving some grace for a single family home. The question is, like, how much? So guys, we're going to include single family homes. We're already doing less for single family homes than for other homes. I don't know, kind of feels about right.
And I'll just add, having been a builder for much of my life, you can do much less than $5,000 worth of work on a house and make it unsafe. So $5,000 is a trigger, but it doesn't mean that someone went into a house with a Sawzall and $100 worth of goods and made their house really unsafe. So I'm not sure that saying that's too low has a whole lot of merit, because life safety issues can crop up on a very small renovation.
All I'm suggesting is you want buy-in, and buy-in is education. And, I think that's very important to, I am myself here just got educated on two things. I'm the farthest thing from a builder you can imagine. I don't even like doing cleanup stuff. But so I think the clearer we are, the better it is for our residents.
We're not building a lot of single-family homes right now, but we have in the past, right? And our arms were not completely around all new construction. This completes that, because everybody deserves a fair, impartial inspection for both this and we'll talk about electrical, right? And that completes that circle. So are we ready to have a motion to set a public hearing for July 7th at 7 p.m.?
I
So
moved.
Second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It is unanimous. Thank you very much. Are you
Thank
sticking
you.
around?
We are.
Let's move on to item 11, which is hold a first reading of an electrical installations ordinance and possibly set a public hearing for, again, surprise, July 7th, 2025 at 7 p.m. Can they be at the same time? I guess they can. All right. And, you're still here.
We're still here.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Slowly getting better at this. Good evening again. We're now here to discuss the electrical installations ordinance update. We'll cover some of the same information. Dates are a little bit different and information is a little different, so we'll just run through that. Same situation. The state, through state statute, maintains the code enforcement authority for electrical installations in all public buildings. While they use some different terminology in the electrical code, it's at the end of the day, it's the same thing, public buildings. In May of 2015, the state granted us the authority to enforce the code, the electric code, NFPA 70, through their MOU locally with our own electrical inspector. It's one person within our fire marshal's office. Just to give you a little background, just a little clear understanding, not to take anything away from all of our fire inspectors, our assistant fire marshal, our fire marshal, but there's a little more stringent guidelines with the electrical inspector. So our electrical inspector has to maintain and hold his master electrician's license. So the electrical inspector is a licensed, maintains his license as a master electrician. Last time this was updated was in 2015, so it hasn't been updated since we first enacted it through the MOU. And again, public buildings. So this does currently, there is no enforcement or authority on single-family homes. Just like in the fire ordinance, the changes that are being proposed would not increase staff numbers at all. And this one's a little bit simpler than the fire prevention ordinance. The only two updates really are formatting procedural changes, much like the fire ordinance, and then adding jurisdiction for single-family homes. So, again, just like in the fire ordinance and FPA 1 and 101, the state of Vermont has not adopted single-family homes for electrical jurisdiction. However, it is there. They still reference the code and allow it to be adopted by individual municipalities if they have so inclined through the MOU. So we would be looking to change this to include single-family homes for the electrical code. This would be all new construction. It would be all renovations or additions in the same manner as the fire prevention code. The difference being that there are owner-occupied licensing exemptions, which essentially means that you could do the wiring work, with two exceptions, without a licensed electrician. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. No matter what, a licensed electrician is required to do any work in a panel or in a service. So you can basically run the wire, but once you want to run the wire to an electrical panel, to a circuit, or to a main electrical service, that needs to be done by a licensed electrician. So the licensing exemptions would be if I lived in South Burlington and I wanted to wire up my unfinished basement, I could put all the outlets in, all the switches in, all the light fixtures in, wire it all up, pull a permit. So the advantage is that the electrical inspector is still going to come to my house and inspect my non-licensed electrical work that I did, probably catch a lot of problems and make my house safer by making recommendations or, making comments on what needed to be changed. But then all I would need to do is hire a licensed electrician to tie that final circuit into the panel. So that's where the owner-occupied exemption lies. And then also what we're proposing, which this is the last bullet, it is a contradiction of the code language for common electrical jargon of breaking wire. Basically, they say if you break wire, then it must be done by a licensed electrician. We can make this exemption again because the state does not enforce single-family home electrical work. We're saying that no permit is required but recommended for the replacement of an existing fixture, outlet, or switch. Last time we had the discussion about, 5, and it was 5 at a time, 5 through the lifespan. And I think we got to the point in the last meeting where it was just, if you have something that's currently there and if you got a black switch and you want a white switch, or you have a fluorescent light and you want an incandescent light fixture, you can replace those on your own. Shorter discussion on my part. That is the electrical ordinance changes.
I like this because it gives you a sense for owner-occupied of right to repair, right? Which we all strive
Correct.
for lots of things, right? Where it's being taken away from us in different technologies. At least we could retain this for a person that is knowledgeable enough, or it's like, oh, I got to find that YouTube video about how to take care of that one problem. So yeah, this works for me, and that feedback you got at the last meeting, I think, was you made the change that we needed. Any comments?
2 quick questions. For both this and the fire safety, you said that this permitting will not require any increase in staff. And that's just because of the automation that's.
So I would say it's twofold. A lot of it has to do with the technology between the online permitting and our ability to do all of our inspections and the quote unquote paperwork and data entry out in the field as it's happening. I would say that's a big part of it. The other aspect of it is when you look at the majority of single family homes being new construction right now, they're in large developments. And whether it's just the respect from the contractors and developers, or whether it's the developers who are already dealing with the fire marshal's office for the multifamily buildings or the public buildings per definition, they're still also consulting the fire marshal's office on these things. So, I'll use an example. There's a large home that's built off of the south end of Heinsberg Road. It's one of those places that's off the road. They have a sprinkler system. The fire marshal's office has been intimately involved through consultation of, hey, what do we do? How do we make this as safe as possible? What can we do to help you to make this proper? So when we look at that, the amount of additional work coupled that really adds up isn't as much as it may seem. You could look at O'Brien Farm and say, oh my God, look at all those homes need to be inspected. But there's a relationship that's with a lot of those developments that's in some ways already happening.
Yeah, I was just thinking with a $5,000 threshold on renovation, there's a lot of renovation that's happening in this, and it's dispersed. So that will involve a lot of, I would have thought, more time than you're.
Yeah, we're also taking advantage of, looking into and working on taking advantage of AI and some computerized systems for their plans review, where now a computer is going to compare the drawing to the code and call out problems. So just not that we're going to be hands off, but we are taking the manual labor, time consuming things, we're bringing that down with technology.
The only other point I wanted to make is by having panel hookup exempted from owner-occupied work in the trades, it can be very hard to find an electrician who will hook up work that somebody else has done. So you may be creating a hardship for a homeowner who goes ahead and does all their work and gets it to the panel, and then they can't find someone who's going to hook it up. So
Why can't that be inspected too?
it gets a little tricky. It's almost a catch-22.
But why couldn't, I mean, if we were to let a homeowner who has enough experience, who now wires their whole basement, and the only thing left is to wire it to the panel, the inspector will come and inspect that too, right? Do they wire into the panel correctly along with everything else? So why is that like the one thing that we're excluding?
So, unfortunately, to be completely honest with you, right, probably out of all of the fire marshal's office duties, all of us in this room have the least experience with the electrical portion of it. Unfortunately, the electrical inspector isn't here. He is pretty passionate about the issues, concerns, and safety ramifications of, including to the people doing the work. Mm-hmm. Right, not just after the fact, but the people doing the work, that non-licensed people in those things, right, where the power really is, the panels, the service. The service is exceptionally important because your utility companies also, typically say you can't touch the service.
Yeah, the service is different, but the panel.
If you have a 200 amp panel,
well, you just
and you don't know what
the breaker outside.
Technically, yes, but you got a 200 amp bus bar and someone can get pretty burned.
It's true.
Can I just follow up a little bit on Lori's call? Because actually, when I came to Vermont, I was surprised that there wasn't a requirement for permitting on electricity. I've lived in Virginia, Florida, the District of Columbia. I mean, it's just the way it is. And for me, it makes a lot of sense to stop you from killing yourself or from fire, which I always associate electricity with, in many cases, the starts of fire. But there is a challenge that I've also noticed in Vermont is getting someone to come out and do the work for you. I mean, the wait, I'm even on plumbing. I remember we had a watermelon went down my wife didn't know that you shouldn't put watermelon grinds down the disposal. And lo and behold, we're in the house 2 days in a sink full of water. And when I called, it was like, yes, you can. We can come out, and then the next 2 to 3 days there'll be double price, or you can schedule in a month. Now, if that was electricity, you're trying to build something renovation, that creates a challenge. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it. Again, I'm surprised that it's not always existed. But is there time factors, or are there ways to help try to schedule out in advance? Or
I think in today's world, right, everyone in one way or another is experiencing the workforce time restraints and how easy it is to get, contractors. I will say that I know the electrical inspector would say, you're exactly right. It is going to take you a long time to get an electrician there just to tie into the panel. And that's why you should pull a permit and have the electrician do all the work, because they're more knowledgeable and they're going to do it properly.
So by bundling all the work, there's a greater likelihood of incentivizing. Okay, thank you.
I'm not saying that. I'm not speaking for the electrical contractors. I'm just,
I'll just add one other thing. With the exemption of not doing anything in a panel, where that's written, would it make sense to have some sort of disclaimer saying if you do this work, you may have a hard time getting someone to hook it up? Just to give someone a forewarning.
No.
I don't know.
I wouldn't do that. No, leave it as is. I have a question. Is there opportunity for some kind of like synergy between fire and electrical inspection to help the homeowner understand the possibility that their RBES isn't going to be quite satisfied? You know?
So there is a partnership in general between the electrical inspector and so the electrical inspector works for the fire marshal.
Yeah.
So there is a partnership there that we see, I won't even say daily, I'll say hourly, where the electrical inspector will be at a location, come to the fire marshal's office and say, hey, I was just here, this isn't we're doing properly. Or the fire marshal's office being somewhere doing a fire life safety inspection or rental registry. We're seeing a huge influx of that now, where that whole office works together. When they're finding problems, they're passing it on to the other. They're also solving problems together. I think a great example of that would be EV, where if you did pull a permit to put EV charging in your existing home, they're going to say, the electrical inspector is going to say to you, hey, have you talked to the fire marshal's office yet? They may have some guidance for you, even though it's not mandated, on how to support this.
What I'm talking about is in single family home new construction, there's a possibility that a contractor didn't put the correct depth of blown-in cellulose in the attic, right? And if you're looking in the attic because you're looking at electrical stuff, right, you might notice that it's not deep enough, or you notice that they didn't put the correct amount of insulation in the wall.
I see what you're saying. So the fire marshal's office on the fire and life safety and building inspection side of things, they have those inspections. They're called rough-in inspections and final inspections. So before sheetrock can be put up, before insulation can be put in, right before the insulation can be put in, the wiring has to be inspected. And then once the insulation's put in, before the sheetrock is covering it up, that has to be inspected. So there are already those procedural processes in place to unite those two things together.
But you
answer
don't
it?
have any specific jurisdiction over that, per se, right? I mean,
Right now?
right now. Well, no, if this were adopted, if both were adopted, would you be able to go to the builder and say, hey, this is insufficient according to what the state specification is for this, our value for this ceiling or for this wall?
So yeah, we currently don't have jurisdiction on the energy code side of it. It's self-certification only.
That's what I mean. So, but would you have the opportunity to tell somebody, like either the builder or the homeowner, hey, this is not to state code?
There'd be opportunity to provide guidance on what is required,
Yeah.
but there's no enforcement there.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. But at least you'd have the opportunity to communicate that.
Sorry, I didn't understand your
Yeah, that's
question. I
okay.
apologize.
I'm satisfied if we want to move forward with a motion to set the public hearing.
I move to set a public hearing for the electrical installations ordinance on July 7th, 2025
At
at 7 p.m.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. It's unanimous. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank
Good
you all.
discussion. Always good, interesting, items to. Oh, here comes another one.
Yes, please, Crispin.
So now we're at item 12, which is consider approving resolution number 2025-10 to establish a capital assessment fee for permits and registrations issued by the fire department and place the funds in a restricted account to be used for the purpose as outlined. Stephen Locke.
Good evening, Stephen Locke, in this role as the fire chief. Back in 2023, when I was before some of you, when we were talked heavily about the adoption of an ordinance to regulate rental housing and that would require additional workers and capacity within the fire station, we made it very clear we didn't have room to take on that team of folks in our existing facility, and that was going to be a problem that was going to need to be addressed in the future. We have that team stood up and running, being very effective. We this year installed a temporary office trailer attached to the fire station as a short-term solution. And while that is working, it's not the best solution in the middle of January and February, and in this August, and it will be warm in there. So it's cold in the winter, warm in the summer, and it's really not conducive to the type of work environment we anticipate our workers will have, or that our citizens will have when they stop in and work and meet with those teams. It's just not doesn't rise to the level of what we anticipate services we deliver. So in an effort to bring to you a way to fund a addition to the fire station that we have previously been in discussions about, one idea is to create a fee upon the users of our prevention division that instead of, there's plenty of different ways you could do this. You go to the voters, you could add it to the grand list, or in my opinion, you could use the people who use these services to fund this. We believe that this capital assessment fee would generate about $175,000 a year. I'd propose that, as written, it would sunset once that building addition was paid for. It's about a $1.9 million addition, so we believe in about 10 years under the current proposal that could be paid for. There would be nothing that would preclude the council from making a one-time contribution if you had excess funds some year, and to pay that off early, and then thereby stopping those fees early. So I want to just talk a little bit about how we the fees that are charged to builders. So what we're really talking about is on construction permits for new or renovations, new construction or renovations. So understanding anywhere in the state today, if you build a building, the state fee or the fee, you've adopted the same fees table as the state does, is $8.50 per $1,000 of construction costs. So whether you build that building in St. Johnsbury or South Burlington, it's just you're writing a check to the city of South Burlington versus the state of Vermont for $8.50 per $1,000 of construction cost, capped at $300,000. So we've had a couple buildings built in the city that are well over $50 million, some closer to $100 million. Those buildings are capped at paying a $300,000 fee. That's that $1 million in revenue that the city takes into the general fund every year. What we're proposing is a 0.5% fee on that construction cost that would be then funneled to a capital assessment fund. So since 2015, 2016, we've issued about 600 construction permits. You heard Chris and his presentation talk about a value of about $670 million for all those permits. Well, if you took the average price of what the permittee paid in an additional fee, so if you took of all that $670 million worth of permits, this 0.5%, the average project would pay an additional $2,000 in fees, $2,120 to be exact. But we're proposing a cap of $20,000. So that would be a project valued at $4 million. So anyone that had a project greater than $4 million would hit a cap. And if you took out of the 600 permits since almost the last 10 years, 28 of them would have hit the cap. And if you take those 28 permits out, because those are going to pay $20,000, the average permit additional fee is about $1,100. So you can really say the average. So I'm gonna take away those big projects, those greater than really 4 million projects, and you're looking at the average fee that would be paid in for those projects is about $1,100. That generates about $150,000. Then we're requesting a 5% fee upon the rental registry, a part per unit. So that's going to be $75 if you're on a short-term rental. So currently they're paying $1,500. So 5% of that is $75. On a normal unit's 115, that would be $7.50 per unit. And on an affordable unit, they currently pay 25. That would be I'm just going to get the math wrong, $1.25. And the reason I would encourage you to apply it to all of them. It's computerized system just generates the fee. It will be a little bit complicated to try to pull one group of that out for what I would say is $125 per unit on about 800 units. That generates about $20,000 a year. And finally, we'd ask for a 5% fee based on the fee of all the other permits. So we do sprinkler permits, fire alarm permits, electrical permits. So again, our new electronic system, very easily to pull out the numbers. We've issued about 220 permits since February 1, and that the average fee that would have been paid into this fund is $8.50. So the surcharge for this capital assessment fee based upon those 225 permits since February would be on average about $8 would come in, $8.50 would come into this fund. Altogether, that generates about $175,000, which is our goal of getting the way to pay finance for the addition over 10 years. So that to me is what we're asking you to do is adopt a resolution that would put the burden of paying for this upon what we believe is the users. So it's an office space that would be big enough to house our current prevention team with room for growth, a public space where we often have builders or developers come in and meet with our team that has a place to lay out prints, have meetings, a professional space for your prevention team to work in. It was asked of me if there are other city buildings in other space in other city buildings. So no space in this building. If you remember right, the old there used to be space in the 575, 577 building we share now with the school, that where the recreation used to be, that is no longer available. The school is using that, and I did reconfirm that this week. And while there is some unused space at 19 Gregory, we have committed to that because we are, as part of a lease addition with the vet center, we need to relocate the police department's training room into that one vacant space. So I would say that there is no available city space unless we wanted to rent office space. And I would say that breaking up our prevention and operations division is akin to breaking up the police department's detective bureau and patrol division. The two, when they are together, they're much more efficient and much more fluid. So with that, I'll take some questions.
How realistic do you think your $1.9 million cost is for this addition?
Well,
and do you have a square footage? Is it 2-story, 1-story? I mean,
single story, about 2,000 square feet. Yeah. We believe we've factored high. But that's also based upon going out to bid. So we're out for a January bid. So it's the next summer construction season. If we push this in the construction season of 26, it's going to, very likely goes up some. We believe we've factored it pretty conservatively so that
we'll have full plumbing.
Yes.
So bathrooms and sinks and everything?
Yeah.
Okay.
Small kitchenette.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Other questions?
So this all sounds pretty reasonable with one caveat that I just want to ask a question. But does Burlington or do other jurisdictions of Vermont have similar fees on top of the Vermont state? Or would we be alone in doing this at this point?
So I believe from my time in Burlington charges more or fees that are different from the state. And as no different than we're going to come back to you and ask you to charge a fee on single family homes because Burlington is the only one that charges that. So the fee structure will be different. I am not aware of anyone who's using this model, to be quite honest. I was trying to figure out some way to pay for this thing, and this is what I came up with.
Okay. So just I guess a caveat on the 0.5% capped at 20. It strikes me it might be useful to kind of spread that out a little bit because it's capped, as you said, at $4 million project. So, any project, from 4 up to whatever 100 million is basically exempt and kind of pushing that increment on all the smaller projects. Whereas maybe if the addition was 0.2% or 0.25, we could kind of spread the burden out and raise the cap. That strikes me as maybe a more equitable way to do just that one piece, which I would be in favor of probably adjusting that.
I don't think we can go down with it. You could raise the cap from 20,000 to a higher number.
Right.
But the problem is there's not that many of those projects that come in, and so I think
you can't count on them because they're too sporadic,
right?
And therefore you can't project them. And
I'm not as comfortable doing that. I started at closer to 1%. And I've worked this scenario in numerous ways. I started with a cap at 30,000, and so I played this model based upon 600 permits. Now it's not a big data set, right? But it's what we have over, since 2018.
I hear you. So I would probably raise the cap, and then if it comes in faster than anticipated, it sunsets faster.
Yeah, I think that I do think that is what I would ask you to do is not reduce the 0.5%, but if you wanted to raise the cap to 30,000, because now you're looking at a $6 million project hits the cap versus a $4 million
or 100,000.
Well, I mean, so it's similarly like we have a cap we have this arbitrary cap at $300,000 with a permit fee, and so we just received a check for $370,000. Developer just sent us the check for $370,000, and we returned him $70,000, saying, "Sorry, you overpaid by $70,000." But were.
But where does that cap translate into? I thought you said 20 million. What's the value of the project that translates into?
So on this proposal,
on the 300.
So on a 300,000, a $36 million project hits the cap.
Million. So you'd have room to move this cap to 360,000.
We certainly could raise the cap on wherever you want to. If you raise the cap, it's going to raise more revenue on the big projects and pay the project down quicker.
Yeah,
without a doubt. I was trying to pick what I thought reading tea leaves would be an acceptable number.
It seems like it's pushing all the costs on the smaller projects, I guess, is my perspective. I don't know.
I mean, I'm okay if you raise the cap to 30 or 40,000, but again, on a 40,000, you're looking at an $8 million project to hit the cap.
Yeah. Other comments?
Yeah, Steve, we talked about a lot of this, and first of all, I think it's a creative funding model for space that's needed. So I appreciate this work. I do, I know you're focusing this on users, but this year's budget passed on fee increases to the community in a number of service areas. So I understand these fees are associated with users, but there's still community members that are paying higher fees on other things like water and so forth. So, and I also I talked to you about sort of the state trying to open up, eliminate obstacles to construction and housing and things like that. And it starts to feel like this is, a bit of a citywide effort to put some additional hurdles in. So I worry about that just in terms of our community absorbing the increased costs, whether they're a user or not. I think there's rationale there. I do think it would be prudent in my mind to include in this, if this moves forward, that once it was paid off, that we sunset it, whatever that time frame is, that there's a firm. We're not going to redeploy funds to something else down the road. So, to me, that would be a responsible message to send that, this is a funding model focused on this space, and again, we're only a year into the rental registry and we're already increasing the fees. So I just have concerns in this environment that it's our community that's absorbing these in tough times, for what it's worth.
I did email Stephen about the sunset clause, and it does state clearly that the fees will sunset once the loan for the addition is paid off, and it could be paid off however we want to. If we let the fee go on until it's paid off, or if City Council decides to take some general fund or revenue that's above our expenses. Whatever I can't term, but anyway, so we have the ability to prepay and end it earlier, and when it ends, the fees sunset and they're gone, right? So I hear, Andrew, what you're saying about possibly raising the cap on the large construction projects.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
Do I understand correctly that the need for the additional space has arisen from the staffing for the rental registry? And this is putting the burden for that extra space on new home construction.
I would say it's primarily more on commercial additions and the primary renovation or primary revenue source was most likely going to be large commercial space.
But on a $250,000 residential project, it would be $1,250.
Yes.
Okay. And covering this with the rental registry doesn't make sense because that's
It could never do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this funding model also takes excess. There are excess revenues exceed our expenses every year in our rental registry. That's also being used to pay down this 1.9 billion over 10 years. So between what we project to be surpluses every year at our current fee structure, which works at about 35,000 at the end of this thing, those monies are being funneled into paying down the note every year.
Are we intending on, so one second, on borrowing from some enterprise fund for this, or?
Stay tuned. I got to get this thing through, and
Okay.
then I would bring
That's
you
something-
back a plan
Okay.
to be able to pay for
Okay,
it.
go ahead, Mike, sorry.
Yeah, no. It was a good question. Where's the money coming from initially? I fully understand the challenges of working in a container, having done so in the UN peacekeeping for us. The winters and the summers, hot and cold, either extreme, and it's only right that we have our employees in a good professional environment. And I also applaud the idea of a common space where you develop an active relationship with builders and developers, and the relationship between the active members of your team and those who basically are hand in hand. But it is listening to the questions of actually all my colleagues here. We do have this sort of challenge between where we're trying to promote development, we're trying to promote housing. If we can grow in commercial growth, they create greater property taxes, which then reduces the challenge on our homestead taxes. So it's striking that very unique balance. And especially not trying to disincentivize small or medium businesses to grow and to participate, sort of like in the vibrancy of our city center. So I would tend to think I'm very creative, putting the focus on the people who are basically using these services. I would tend to agree, but I would tend to acknowledge that to change the scale a little bit, to try to reduce, if not reduce, the challenge at the 1,100 that you said. I mean, that's 1,100 on what kind? That's what percentage would that be?
So that is out of the 600 and some odd applications we've received since 2018. That's what the average value of that 5% would represent, or 0.5% would represent.
0.5%. So that'd be on $100,000, $100 to $110,000 project. That would be the added fee for them, that 1,100. I would tend to also think if we could raise a little bit, I wouldn't say to 100,000, but to 30,000 or something a little higher, that would move the sun setting sooner. Anything to move it sooner. And I understand, Tim, that we could, if we have additional funds sometime, but I'm a little concerned we'll have less additional funds going forward than we've had historically.
We can always come back and revisit the resolution.
But I would say the
You want to raise it to
changing
30,000?
30,000, just a little bit more, because I don't think that's enough disincentive on bigger projects to say, I'm not going to do something. But we want to limit the time frame in which smaller businesses may face a choice between, as we try to fill out city center now there, do I come here or do I go somewhere else?
I'll say my opinion is that's completely within your purview. I think you can make that as part of your motion, and if you buy into everything else, which is all conceptually, you could make that as part of your motion, and we can run upstairs and change the number and have you sign it.
And on your calculations, how would that play out over 10 years?
It's not going to be. It won't be significant because there's not a lot that hit the cap. But again, it will be. It may at the end of the day cut a year or two off.
Yeah, that's significant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Andrew, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would raise the cap. Honestly, I would probably raise it to the same cap that exists under state law. If the projects are capped at 36 million, I would raise this to 180 to be consistent. I don't know why we would do anything else. So
My only concern is, at the end of the day, 38.5% of commercial properties generate a third of our property tax. And I think that's good. And if we can grow that, that's wonderful. I think if we don't want to disincentivize large properties like we've seen, such as Beta or on Logic, or hopefully the renovations to University Mall. So,
but here we're disincentivizing small, right? I mean, we're imposing a fee, and we're imposing it on the small rather than all.
but we're trying to find a balance, and by raising the fee a little bit, as we heard, we may move the challenge away in 8 years versus 10. But anyway, I think some rebalancing I would favor at least.
Can I
Go ahead, please.
when you're saying say $8 million cap, that's also on commercial residential, correct?
It's correct.
So that if you move it from $8 million cap to say a $30 million cap, what you're going to capture with that bigger ticket fee is the multi-unit story residential rental housing, which is what we are trying to incentivize with our density and infill and city center and density thing. So I think that's you would be capturing more, but you would have a much bigger bill on those larger multifamily homes that are coming in between the $25 and $40 million construction costs. Is
Right,
that
but again, Jesse, are there projects like that in the pipeline
So
that we could count on? Because if there are, then again, what I would suggest is we lower the 0.5,
those are $2 million.
right, to some other number. And
So
cap-
what are they paying about $2 million in construction costs on those?
Across the street here,
Yeah,
they're $28 million units.
like the big one there's 28 million. Okay, so that's a good frame of reference.
but up to you.
Well, the difference we're talking about is they would charge additional 20,000 or 30,000 on a multi-unit that has how many units? If we're using that as the
I think at some point at some point I'm starting to fly a little too. I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I'm not necessarily comfortable. But I think what I think makes sense, raising the cap to 30 or 40,000, so you're catching up to like a $12 million building. I think that's still reasonable. I don't know that I would go much higher than that. From me wanting to have a straight face, feeling like I can tell the developer and educate them and have them still feel okay about it.
Is there appetite for 40,000? Okay. Elizabeth?
I would be interested in proposing that we have this revised, the resolution revised, and I think you looked at this, Steve, based on sort of what captured a lot of the permits up to a certain level. So, and you based it on what, the 660 since February, right?
I think the real number here, because the driving factor is the data over 8 or 9 years. That's the 150,000, and that's generated off the construction permits since 2018 or so. With the vast majority of those, only 28 of those 600 that would have been over the cap of 20,000. So what we're starting to talk about here is not a very big subset of buildings.
Yeah, I guess what I'm interested in is, given that this is the first time we've discussed this resolution, I would like to give the public an opportunity to provide us feedback either in our next meeting or one-on-one that we normally get feedback on before we take action on this. But revise it to whatever level we think is appropriate. And I don't have a strong opinion. I know, Steve, you based it on some real information, but I think revising it up to some other level is somewhat arbitrary at this point. It's not using the data that Steve has available.
Well, I think we're trying to raise it to 40 to match what we think of the values of these buildings are, the larger buildings, right? So that they pay a fair share of what the cost of this addition is to the firehouse. So you're concerned that well, obviously we want the public to have the ability to give feedback, but I mean the public could include also developers and or whoever, right? Construction people, right? So, but I think we have positive feedback on this generally, at least 4 of us, right? The question is just allowing. So, is the council comfortable with it? Do we have to pass this resolution tonight? If we haven't, we feel good about it, but we wanted to. I mean, if it gets more publicity, then I'm sure that we're going to have. I know the people that'll come in and want to talk about it, right? And we could get their feedback.
I think it's a good point to have public feedback. I mean, it may change or may not change what we do, but I think all these people are members of our public, our residents, and everyone wants to have the opportunity to comment on it. And if we delay it till the next session. You could even tweak it and say if we do 30, 40, it may change the numbers, give us a little more specificity on that, or whether there is, we're just talking about the margins.
There was an article in the other paper about this, right? But I don't think is that correct? Because I wasn't here for that meeting. That was
No, this is the first time it's being presented.
But the concept was floated back in April 7th meeting, right? That was the first time? No? It didn't, okay. All right.
So sorry, Laura, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, I understand we want to incentivize the big buildings. That makes sense to me, but I'm confused why 0.5% is easier for a small job to absorb than it is for a big job to absorb. And a big job is being done by a developer who has perhaps more resources, and somebody who's building a $250,000 home, or even a smaller home, they're building a tiny home or doing an ADU or whatever. 0.5% seems like it would be at least as onerous on that person as it is on a developer. So how do we work with progressive taxation? And these fees are, we're doing sort of reverse progressivism.
Feels very regressive.
If we're making a higher fee for the smaller person and a lower fee for the bigger person. So there's some incentivizing, I understand, to get the big projects built, but it's the little guy who's screaming they can't pay their tax bill. So
But as we grow the
tax base,
the property base, then we help restrain it. In fact, that's what's helped us restrain it so far. The question is, what is the exact balance?
Or do we make it worse because we have all these additional people and we have to do more schooling and we have to?
Well, that's a whole different discussion, and it's spun many different ways.
Spin it out.
But you could very easily exempt projects less than $1 million, right? So you could exempt projects less than $1 million, and then increase the cap. You're most likely then to capture your target, what I think what you want to be your target audience.
Yes. I like that.
That feels better to me too.
I'm just thinking these smaller projects having that 0.5%.
Yeah, I mean, they're the ones that are not.
I love your thought.
That's not what's That's not what's making this. It really is the bigger projects.
Yeah.
So exempt less than $1 million and add in, raise the cap.
exempt less than 750 or something like that.
500.
500. I would think 500 is.
And so anything under 500 is exempted, and you raise the cap to 40 or
Do you-
50.
Do you need to take those suggestions and go back and work the numbers again?
Can I make a go?
I'd love you to make a suggestion. You keep me out of trouble.
So I think part of the point in bringing this to you now is that one, we are issuing permits all the time. So this is permits that are passing by. But two, being under construction next summer on this, letting us go to design, letting us go to bid this winter, letting us construct next summer is going to capture the best economic time. It's only going to get more expensive into the future. So I think the idea here is if we have some head nods that you're comfortable with this, we can now go forward and start putting together the other parts of this financing and project plan and bring that back to you with a reconsideration of this $1 million, 40 million, whatever that it is, cap, in a resolution with more feedback in a month-ish.
And could we add some public outreach on this as well?
It's
Well,
it's a
it'll be an
warm
item on the
public
agenda.
meeting.
Agenda, just
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's going to be
Okay.
something written
Okay.
about this in the other papers. So
Having the
Please write
exemption for small projects makes me much more comfortable with this.
Yeah, I think, Lori, the concern I have with that, which is what Jesse brought up already, is just the projects that may fall in are going to be some of the multifamily units and multi-unit buildings that we've talked about as wanting to incent and the higher density. And my concern is that the fees that are in this year's budget, the rental registry fees to start with, the increases, those are going to get passed on as rent as well. So in terms of affordability, we're between a rock and a hard place here. But I'm definitely okay with moving forward on the funding formula for the space that's needed for employees. I just think we have to be aware of kind of collateral implications too.
Yeah. And in the Civic Soul presentation today, they very specifically talked about the lower income housing or the missing middle housing as being really needing to be incentivized in a big way for us to grow our workforce. So we're getting it on both ends.
do we have a plan? He's writing stuff down.
Make sure I understand. Would you like to exempt less than $1 million or less than 750 or less than 5? I heard those three numbers.
I would say $1 million.
I'd say 750.
1050.
Okay.
1050.
Average is
100. I'd say 500. So how are we going to figure it out?
And you liked, I know you don't like it, but you're okay with the moving the cap up to 40.
I am okay with that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Have enough.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for your good thinking.
Time for a break.
Should have had this.
Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Thank you very much. to the meeting? Can somebody dim the lights?
Is this a trick question?
You need a ding, 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 ding.
The play will resume in 5 minutes. Okay, all counselors are seated, and we're going to go on with item 13, which is hold a first reading of an update to the utility service line ordinance and possibly set a public hearing for July 21st, 2025 at 7 p.m. with Bettina Miguez again. Good evening again.
Good evening.
I
Pulling
don't
up
see you.
Zoom. I'm putting up Zoom.
Oh, I can just do it. I have it open on my.
You have it open. Thank you. Appreciate it, Tizzy. Then I will not open Zoom.
So this is an interesting item here that I'd never imagined that this was a problem until it's a problem, right?
Right. Yeah, it was definitely not on my list when I first started the job. So what we're going to talk about are residential connections to electric utility and electrical upgrades. And I guess what?
I can't see it on the screen. Go ahead.
Oh, and I do want to say that this subject came up because of some residents' concerns that were funneled up to us, and so I want to kind of go straight to what we want to do, and that's the next slide, which is we want to amend this ordinance to clarify that if you're replacing a utility service line that connects from your building, from an existing residential building to the electrical grid, and you are able to do that connection aerially because there is a pole on the street, then we are exempting you from having to underground that line. The current ordinance is has a little bit of a gray area in terms of what happens when you're replacing a line. And definitely the intent of the ordinance for aesthetic and safety reasons is to move electrical connections underground. So that is what I'm proposing, and now I'm going to talk about why. So Burlington residents are already electrifying their homes for many reasons. Maybe they want to save money, maybe they want to add air conditioning, or maybe they are interested in combating climate change. And it is something that the city wants to achieve as part of their climate goals, is to get more home electrification. However, home electrification may require a panel upgrade. So we're still, this has been very much on topic after the electrical ordinance. We keep talking about electrical stuff. And when you have a panel upgrade, you might need to upgrade your connection to the grid, your actual wire that is connecting you to the electrical utility. Underground connections are expensive. Many neighborhoods already have a mix of underground aerial utility service lines. And as I said, the current ordinance is not specific. It's not explicit about what happens when you're replacing or upgrading. So just as a quick aside, why the city cares, the Climate Action Plan's goal is to electrify 360 homes annually to reduce emissions by 9% by 2030. Also, we have a plan to replace 75% of gas vehicles with electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles to reduce emissions by 42% by 2030. And as I mentioned, you might need, when you're adding a lot of these intensive electrical items to your home, like an EV charger or a heat pump, or several heat pumps usually, you might need an upgrade to your panel. We are just so to put it in context, we are, South Burlington residents are already adopting a lot of these. So the cold climate heat pumps, that's the chart on the left in green. In 2023, this is data by the Energy Action Network. There were already 1,600 heat pumps installed in South Burlington, and also electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. We are now up to 978 vehicles, almost 1,000 vehicles. Again, that's starting from 100 in 2016. So in 10 years, we really and the pace seems to continue to rise. We'll see what happens when tax credits expired. But for now, the pace of adoption is pretty high, and it's pretty. Chittenden County itself is one of the highest, has one of the highest rates of adoption in the state.
This is the state?
This is just South Burlington.
Okay. I was like, I just wasn't sure.
No, just South Burlington. Okay. Yeah. But so if you see in 2023, there were 600 and some, and then there was a 50% increase in 2024, and we're now at 978. Yep. Next. So electric utility connections, what are we talking about? So the pictures are the easiest way of thinking about this. If you see, starting from the left, you could have a house that has an aerial connection to an aerial transformer. So we're talking about an aerial connection from the house. It reaches somewhere on the side of the house, and then it goes all the way to a pole on the street. Underground to aerial, that would be the middle one. You have an underground connection from the residence all the way to that pole that you see on the street. And underground to underground would be the one on the right, and that is you don't actually see any cables, and there is a transformer there on the ground. Next. So a little bit of a timeline. The National Electric Code started requiring conduit sometime in the late 80s. It was a little bit hard to pinpoint, to be honest. I thought it was a certain year, and then I couldn't, going back to the archives, I couldn't actually find the right time. But so some houses built before that may not have conduit. And what that means is an encasing through which you can put a wire. In 1993, that's when the ordinance we're talking about was passed that required utility connections to be set underground. And then, as you know, 2022 Climate Action Plan was adopted with goals for electrification, and 2025, that's where we're at, that's where we're now, with some residents raising some complaints about cost of electrification. So GMP may own the line. Some underground lines are actually owned by the homeowner. But in any case, the owner bears the cost of any installation to do an upgrade. An aerial connection might cost about $2,000, but GMP waives that fee when you're electrifying. An underground connection can cost anywhere from, I would put it at maybe $5,000 to $20,000. It really depends on what the conditions are, if you're doing some trenching, if you're doing boring under the street to go to a transformer that is on the other side of the road. Next, ahead there. Okay, so we try to estimate how many parcels are affected, and we ended up going with parcels and not actual homes based on the available data. And we found that of all the residential parcels, so I'm excluding commercial data from here, from this estimate, about 24% of all residential parcels have an underground connection that was built before 1989. So it's about 1,700 parcels. So that it is likely that most of those do not have a conduit. More generally, 35% of all residential parcels have an overhead transformer on the street. And so what that means is that they could potentially connect aerially to the electric grid. Yes. We did reach out to Green Mountain Power about this. And what we heard is that They are not concerned with having more residential area connections in South Burlington, and the reasons for that are that outages are extremely rare in South Burlington. And so, for example, we're not in their plan. They are doing a lot of undergrounding of lines to improve climate resilience elsewhere in their area of service, but South Burlington is not within that right now. And then also a down residential connection, that's a down aerial residential connection, doesn't really affect the electric supply to the rest of the neighborhood. And so they're not necessarily concerned about ripple effects from this. So what we're recommending is to amend the ordinance to add a clause for replacements allowing these aerial connections when utility poles already are present on the street. And we are recommending to warn for a public hearing and a second reading of this amendment. And now I think I'm ready for questions.
What does the state require now for brand new single family home amperage? Is it 100 amp service standard? There must be a standard, right?
I do
For
not know
minimum
the answer to the
service.
question.
Mr. Smith?
I don't think there's any state requirement.
Is
Some
there a
people,
national code requirement for single family home construction?
not that I am aware of.
Okay. Not that it's important. I was just curious. And then the curiosity then extends to underground connections. That's mostly new construction in the city?
They're in the Orchard neighborhood.
There's underground?
are homes that were built. Well, there's underground to aerial.
Well, no, I'm talking just on underground to underground where you have transformer
Pedestals.
boxes sitting on the ground, right?
So-
That's mostly new.
That's mostly
like in the
new.
last 20 years.
But aerial to underground. there's a lot
Probably
of that.
after the 1993, for sure, ordinance. That's what was happening a lot in new developments was underground to underground because we were requiring the undergrounding.
What I'm getting at is that in the last 20 years, those homes, do they have adequate service that they don't need an upgrade in amperage? You know?
So I would say that in the last, I do not know the answer to that particular question, but I would say that if they were built in the last 20 years, they probably have adequate conduit. And so if they need
Right,
to
okay.
upgrade,
Yeah.
it is an easy installation and it's not as costly at
So
all.
this seems like the right thing to do. If nobody has any questions, I'll entertain a motion to set the date for the public hearing.
So,
So,
if there's existing underground to aerial, would we require the homeowner to then use that underground pathway? And is that expensive to use the existing underground pathway?
This would make it so if you're underground to aerial, you can go aerial to aerial to
No,
your
I
house.
understand. But
So-
if you're underground to aerial, is it the same $10,000 to $20,000 to?
If you are underground to aerial
Right.
and you have adequate conduit,
Yeah.
then it basically costs nothing, right? GMP comes, passes a new
Well, that's
wire,
the question. But this
and
would, this would allow
and they would
them
not
to
they would not
bypass
go
that.
aerial.
But this
so-
would allow them to bypass that and go to.
So GMP would prefer to stay underground if it's already underground and they have a conduit. Like it's a lot easier for them. Otherwise, they would need to make a new connection aerial in your house, a new connection to your panel from the new aerial connection. So it's a lot more work for them, right? So in the cases where you have adequate conduit, you would remain underground.
They're going to do that in any event, notwithstanding that they don't have to.
It's
Gonna be the
easier
path
for
of
them not to.
least resistance.
That'll be the path of least resistance, so we don't have to put that in the ordinance.
That's my understanding, yes.
And when would someone replace a line in and apart from upgrade? Because I guess when I was thinking about this, I thought about this as, facilitating upgrades, 100 amp to 200 amp. I hadn't really thought about it as facilitating replacements. So what is a replacement versus an upgrade?
I did an upgrade on an underground a year and a half ago. The only reason to do a replacement is if there's a damage to the wire that's underground. Otherwise, that wire stays in place, and damage gets caused by lightning sometimes and other things.
Right, but if it's underground, they're going to replace it underground. So I'm trying to understand, I guess, why this is replacements as opposed to upgrades. There's the ordinance. Why are we exempting replacements as opposed to simply exempting upgrades?
I didn't see that in the wording.
Well, the proposal is that replacements are exempt. And when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about as exempting upgrades. And so I'm just trying to understand the distinction there and what set of things are we exempting that are not upgrades, and do we want to be exempting that set of things?
My understanding would be that if you're replacing the line, is because there, as Councillor Smith noted, there has been some damage.
Right.
So, and currently, what GMP will do is they will put an aerial line, if possible, to your house to resume service as soon as possible. But that is not contemplated by the current ordinance.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
It is still a gray zone, and so in a way, we're just
the
basically
questions that have
being
come to you have
explicit.
been about upgrades?
Yes.
Can
Okay.
I?
Yeah, sure.
I think we might be missing semantics here.
Okay.
Are you saying in the red line version, replace your
I'm looking at the PowerPoint, the proposed number 6.
where it says replacements of utility
Yeah.
service lines? So I think we are using the term replacements to mean any time you would be putting a new wire in, whether for damage or for upgrades.
Or for upgrading.
Right.
We're just saying if a new wire is going in, that it would be exempt if there was this option and wouldn't require additional trenching undergrounding.
Part of the idea
So
of
if-
talking about replacement, sorry, Jesse, is that you are replacing, it means an existing service. This is not new. So that's the way we were considering the language, but we could potentially change
I
that.
think it's semantics, Andrew, whether my wire's been damaged and I want to replace it because it's been damaged, or I'm upgrading my service and I want to replace it because I need more power. The ordinance, by saying replacement, it allows either. And if you have a buried line that's not in conduit, or if it's in conduit that's for 100 amp service and you're putting in 200 amp service, the wire for the 200 amp service won't fit through the existing conduit. So it's creating a flexibility for anybody who's got a home where there are power poles on the street to be able to go aerial if they need to upgrade or replace for some reason their service. So it works for either with the replacement.
Yeah, I guess I'm just questioning whether that non-upgrade scenario is something we need to legislate for. But whether those scenarios have come up or
Well, I can tell you if someone's underground gets damaged and they have to do another underground, it's a lot of money. And if aerial is an option and we're allowing it for upgrades to service, it would seem that it would be punitive to not allow it for somebody whose wire got damaged. You can't do it, but you can. That's
policy. But okay, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it.
So I need a motion to set a public hearing on July 7th for this.
And just to be clear, we have put it on July 21st on the agenda, but we have maybe in a conversation about whether we not have a July 21st meeting. So we are asking to move it to July 7th. That works for you still, right? Okay.
So moved?
So we have a motion.
second.
We have a motion and second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
I
Aye. It's unanimous. Thank you for your second presentation tonight and your final one.
Thank you.
Please stick around for Liquor Commission, where no liquor will be served. So I now need we're at item 14 to convene as Liquor Control Commission. Can I have a motion to enter liquor control?
so moved.
Second.
We have motion second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We're now in liquor control, and we need to motion to approve Charlie's on Fire, Club 35, Champlain Farms, Farmers and Foragers, and Waffle Chalet.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve those applications. All those in favor say aye.
I
Aye. It's unanimous. Now we need a motion to come out of liquor control.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We're out of liquor control, and we are at item 15, which is review significant agenda item topics for the next meeting.
So right now, the significant topics we have are introducing the new Deputy Finance Director, Rich Donahue, whose first day will be June 16th. The intention, as I mentioned earlier, the intentional public comment opportunity for our policies and strategies conversation, bringing you a contract for agreement with Champlain Water District about managing our drinking water system, appoint committee members, council liaisons to committees. And just a reminder that you have 3 meetings this week. This meeting, you have the CCRPC opportunity. Then you will also have the Policies and Strategies retreat on the 27th. And then you will also have setting the tax rate on June 30th.
What was the CCRPC one? Which?
That's the CCRPC and Vermont League of Cities and Towns educational opportunity for council members.
What day is that?
That is on
Do we already have that?
June 8th, June
Oh, it's at the 11th.
11th.
At
Yep,
5.
that's what I meant.
Well, there's one at 5 and one at
5:45.
yeah.
It's-
Okay, so it's at 5:45.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can get rid of this one because it's.
5:45.
Oops.
Yeah, it starts at 5:45.
I see. All right. Got it. Okay. Because I had a save the date time, but it was the wrong time. So, okay. Good. Okay. Is that it?
Yep.
Okay. Item 16. Any other business tonight?
I was actually hoping to address the council very briefly.
Very briefly. You'll have to go to a microphone and identify yourself.
What?
You'll have to turn on the microphone and identify yourself.
Thank you. I was hoping to address the council very briefly on item 15D. We have been very fortunate on the Economic Development Committee, since we have 2 open slots this time, to have 2 applicants, of both of whom are incredibly talented. We're fortunate. One is Chris Kerrigan, who is already sitting on the committee, and he's doing a remarkable job, and I wholeheartedly recommend him. The other is Brad Crumpf. Brad is currently on the SPBA board, but his day job is he's the executive director of the UVM Health Network. A pretty high-end job, and certainly the health network is is connected with us in a way that it's an important connection, and I think the Economic Development Committee should really have him. And Brad, when I asked him, I asked him to apply. He basically he is very interested. He's motivated. He said he and his wife both need to get more involved in the community, to support the community, to support things going forward in South Burlington, and was excited about doing it. It's always good to have one rep off the SPBA board on the Economic Development Committee. John Burton served that purpose, but he's going off the SPBA board now. So Brad would be certainly a replacement, and a great replacement. Frankly, I wholeheartedly endorse him. My reason for speaking, other than to endorse them both, is that Brad can't be here this week for the interviews, and there have been no future interviews scheduled. And I just want to be sure whether he's appointed after an interview that's at some future time, or appointed without an interview, or I should say being considered, that he not be cut off. His appointment wouldn't be cut off because of not being able to complete an interview, or the likelihood. So I just was putting that on the table. You have a completed application from both of them, and I certainly would want them to be approved. And then it's of course up to you how you want to do it. Consider them. That's it.
Thank you,
Unless you have
Tom.
any questions for me.
All right. Thanks. Okay. Item 17 and 18, consider entering an executive session pursuant to
Tim,
1 VSA.
Just real briefly on other business, do we want to put the capital assessment agenda item somewhere on should it go on this next meeting or
The resolution.
the resolution? Yeah.
So I think it's going to take us a few weeks to put together the rest of the effort.
Okay.
So bring it to you all as one kind of complete package. So later in July.
Just want to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you. So consider entering executive session for 1 VSA 313A3 for the purpose of discussing appointments to all municipal committees and also for the purpose of discussing the appointment of a public officer.
I move that the city. Oops, sorry. Thank you, Laurie. I move that the city council enter into executive session pursuant to 1 VSA 313A3 for the purpose of discussing the appointment of a public officer and specifically to discuss appointments to municipal committees and the council vacancy and bringing in Jesse Baker, city manager, and Steve Locke, deputy city manager.
Second.
Thank
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. Does that cover both? Okay, good. So
And we're not coming back.
we're not coming back? But I'm going to go and then come back.
Are we staying here or are we?
Yeah, we can stay here.